Okay, I don't know if I can answer these or not, except for an okay. Uh, um, I'll just, I'm kind of uh, a little unprepared because I had planned to pre-record all this, but I've been fighting a really horrible sore throat, and for a while I couldn't even talk, so I couldn't pre-record it. So here I am. But I kind of just wanted to, cover a couple of things with you guys. I really appreciate y'all showing up for this. This is really kind of fun looking at my own picture on this screen, and not really knowing or seeing anybody there to talk to. It makes it kind of weird. But and you'll have to pardon the reflection on my glasses. That's my computer monitor. The camera is at the top of the monitor, and it's the only way I can get to it. If it's really bothersome, I can take my glasses off if you guys want to see what my eyes look like. But just to cover a few things, I'd like to kind of give all of you a bit of an overview on GRA USA in general, and how we kind of got started, and some laws that we've worked with, some of our family rights activity in a couple of states, and some upcoming legislation that we're very interested in, that I would really love to get you guys help on. First off, how did we get started? Well, back in 2008, my wife and I had custody of 2 grandchildren, and eventually the mom and dad split up, and mom kind of got partial custody back anyway. Our social services agency, I think you guys call it DHS out there, it's called DSS in South Carolina, got involved, and it turned out that a family friend, or a person we thought was a family friend, there was a suspicion that he had done some really bad things with my granddaughter. So DSS decided that they should have the children, and we were not allowed to have custody. They came up with first one reason or another. We actually fought the system for almost 8 years to try to get our grandchildren back to us. And we had agreed that there would be no contact with either parent. But in the course of all of it, we had, I guess, sort of impressed the judge a little, but DSS made their case, and it stuck. The end result is those 2 grandchildren have now been adopted out. Of course, the parental rights were terminated, and once their adoptions were final, even though the people in the system had told us all along that the people who were adopting them wanted us to be in their lives and be grandparents, once they had those finalized papers, those people just plain said no, no way, no contact allowed, and DSS kind of went along with it. They just said, well, they're the parents now, so they have the final say, we're out of it, and wouldn't help us a bit. That happened over several years. Back while all this was going on, I had a judge tell me one day, this is when they were first talking about termination of the parental rights. A judge told me, he said, John, or Mr. Schaefer, because we were in court, we don't have to like it, but the law in this state is when the rights of the parents are terminated, the rights of the whole family goes right out the window with them. It may not be right. We may not like it, but it's the law. We have to follow it. And if you, then he looked me straight in the face and he says, if you want that to change, you have to change the law. Well, that was the seed that started Grandparents' Rights Association of the USA. Several weeks later, there were 3 people in my living room. Matter of fact, I was sitting on this same couch where you see me right now. And we started the GRA organization. Back then, it was just in South Carolina. It was GRASC. And it grew. I made some friends on Facebook and other places. And a really fantastic lady named Ruth Cummins in Tennessee said, well, we need to do that same thing here. So we established the Grandparents' Rights Association of Tennessee. So now there's 2 of us. Shortly after that, some people in North Carolina said, well, hey, we need to do that here. So the same thing happened again. All of a sudden, we're in 3 states. Now, about that time, and what actually got me into the political end of things and trying to get things really going to get laws changed, there's another organization, mostly on the internet, called Gov Abuse. And I grew up in the 60s. Any of us that grew up in the 60s, we know about protests. We've all protested. Well, Gov Abuse is a protest organization, and I kind of joined up with them, and we organized a nationwide protest. It was led by a lady in Cleveland, Ohio, and another fella and myself nationwide, and we coordinated everything and actually had I'm going to try to remember these numbers. I know this is not accurate, but it's close. On the day of our national protest, we had people in front of courthouses in I think it was 39 states, and I'm pretty sure we had over 400 county courthouses covered in those 39 states. Every one of those protests took place on the same day at the same time. That was a big deal, and it made the news in several locations. However, not one single law got changed. We made a lot of noise. We made some friends. We made some enemies. Brought a little awareness up, but not one single law got changed. So we decided to try it again the following year, and it kind of went the same. We didn't have quite as many people out, but did the same thing again, and still not a single law got changed, not one. Well, I got to thinking, but about this time was when that judge had been talking to me. And I thought to myself, okay, look, standing out in front of courthouses with a megaphone and parading up and down on the sidewalk isn't doing us any good at all. What is going to do some good? In my old country logic, I said, well, okay, listen to this judge. He said, if you want a law to change, you have to change it. Well, who changes laws? That would be members of the legislature. Well, I'm not about to run for public office. So the next best thing is to give a few members of the General Assembly some heartburn and see what they can do, which is exactly what we did. We got started on this. That's kind of how we elevated from protesting to changing laws. There's another evolvement that went on here too. At first, I was pretty much interested strictly in getting something done about the DSS system. That system, their social services actually in all 50 states. It's a broken system. It leads to the foster and adopt program, which there's a lot of kids suffering, in those systems. And but that was my primary interest because that's what had happened to my grandchildren. Well, some other folks, came into the organization with us, and also while all this is going on, during the same time frame, other states are starting to get interested. We had 3 states. We went from 3 states to, I believe it was 5 or 6 states during that time. And then along came 2010 and 2011. I had been able to talk with a couple of members of the legislature. I couldn't get anybody from my county delegation. My county, I have 3 members of the House of Representatives from this county and 1 senator. That's to the state Senate, not federal. And I couldn't get a single one of them to pay any attention whatsoever to what I was trying to do, what the organization wanted. None of them would listen at all. And I had some ideas written down. I'd gotten a yellow writing tablet. I knew what was wrong because of what the judge had told me about, the grandparents being pretty much just ignored in the family court. I knew what we wanted it to be, so I just wrote down those 2 things. I said, okay, here's the problem, and here's our possible solution. How do we get from point A to point B? Well, when my legislative delegation wouldn't listen, and anybody can do this. This is not just me. This is anybody's right in this United States. When my delegation wouldn't listen, I went over a county, talked to people in that county's delegation. And a lot of times what I got from those guys was, well, you're not my constituent. I can't help you. And I'm thinking, well, this is a state thing that I'm trying to get done. Why doesn't anybody want to help? First off, from my own delegation, but then even from another county, why don't they want to help, since it would affect people in their county as well? So I just kept going. I went still another county and finally found a member of the House of Representatives that was interested in what I had to say and was willing to try to do something about it. Well, she looked at my ideas that I had 4 or 5 paragraphs written out, all this stuff. She looked at my ideas, and then she had her legal team take what I'd written down and reformulate it and reword things slightly. She pretty well kept my same wording, but reformulated more than anything else into the right format to be introduced as a bill in the General Assembly, which could be acted on. And she introduced it. It was amazing. I felt like I was really making progress. That particular year, one thing you have to understand about the South Carolina legislature that's different than a lot of them in other states. The South Carolina legislative session lasts for 2 years. So in this case, and we just had one in, this is 2016, our legislative session was actually 2015 and 2016. Back then it was 2011 and 2012. Well, this bill was introduced in 2012. Now, the way it works here, if a bill is introduced in the first year of the session and doesn't make it all the way through, it can carry over to the following year and finish the session. But if it doesn't make it through that second year, then it's dead completely and has to be completely reintroduced from scratch in the new legislative session coming up in the following odd year. Okay, so that's pretty much what happened. The bill died in committee in 2012. So we reintroduced it, same lady, in 2013. But another thing that happened here at that time was we had an election come up. It was the 2012 election cycle happened in there. And all of the members of the House of Representatives were up for re-election. Plus, that particular year, the senator from my county was up for re-election. Well, as it happened, the senator from my county was the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and it was his committee that let that bill die the previous legislative year, the end of the 2012 year. See, our legislature ends in June, so that was like 5 months before the elections in November, or 4 months. So during that 4 months, he's out here campaigning, and here's old John. I'm hitting him up with, why did you let a perfectly logical, sensible bill die in your committee and not at least let it go to the floor for a vote? And he didn't like that too much, but he finally started listening a little bit, and we ended up being friends. In 2013, we'd kind of learned a few things. I'd learned a lot. I found out that if a bill can be introduced in both the House and the Senate at the same time, it's called companion legislation. And because it's introduced in both chambers at the same time, it gets a whole lot more interest, and usually it'll push on through if it's a good bill. Well, that's exactly what happened. We introduced this thing as companion bills in both the House and Senate, and that same senator co-sponsored the Senate version of the bill. So we had really turned him around. And what happened that year, it was the identical bill to the year before that had died in his committee. But that year, in 2013, that bill passed both the House and the Senate unanimously and went to the governor and was signed into law. Now, that bill did one simple little thing. Remember back to what that judge had told me. If we terminate the parents' rights, the whole family's terminated right along with them. That's just the way it was. Now, as a parallel to that, over in the family court, well, not really in family court, when DSS is involved. The way the placement statutes in South Carolina were written at the time, if a child was taken from the parents, then they had to have a show cause hearing within 72 hours. But the way the placement statutes were written, grandparents were not mentioned anywhere in the placement statutes having to do with the removal of the child. So what was happening was family court judges were looking at the placement statutes, not seeing any mention of grandparents, and ended up saying, okay, you guys, you're the grandparents, you're not mentioned in the placement statutes, so you guys just go sit in the hall, and when we're done, we'll tell you what we did. That was about as far as a grandparent could get when DSS was involved in the family court. Okay, what this bill did, and this is not word for word verbatim, but basically it gave grandparents, and the way we worded it was grandparents or relatives of the first or second degree. Now, in South Carolina, first or second degree includes parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, aunts and uncles, and any sibling that's as of age or over 18. Does not include cousins. I don't know why, but it does not include cousins. Anyway, the way this bill read was any grandparent or relative of the first or second degree has the right to ask the court to be made a party to the case when a child is removed from the parents. Real simple. It was less than 100 words, 2 paragraphs, and it made that one simple statement. And all it said was that we had the right to ask for to be made a party to the case. It did not say we had the absolute right to be made a party to the case. Left that discretion up to the judge. But what it did do was it put the word grandparent into the statute. And when the judges saw that, then they recognized, or they had no excuse to say, okay, you guys go sit in the corner or out in the hall or whatever. They had to at least let us in there and ask. They had to do that. They had no choice. That's the law now. With that one little thing, that did a huge turnaround in how many kids were being put in the foster system, because the whole reason for doing that, the grandparents could go in, ask to be made a party to the case. As a party to the case, they have every right of anybody else that's part of that case to have representation, to ask questions, to petition the court. The whole idea was to petition the court for temporary custody or permanent custody of the children to keep them out of the foster care system. And with family. That's the important part, is with family. And once that was recognized by the courts, we didn't have a whole lot of trouble getting the judges to see it, because once the bill passed, it goes out in the legislative review as new judiciary to every lawyer and judge in the state. So they get it in writing that this change is there. And if they don't see it, it's their own fault. Now, the lawyers, on the other hand, a lot of them don't see it. So it's up to us to educate the lawyers that on what's going on, and make them aware of the new legislation so that they will actually do this for us. If a grandparent needs to have representation to do that petition to the court, great. In South Carolina, we can do it pro se or on your own without a lawyer. And actually, you can do that in any state. A lot of states will try to tell you can't, but guess what? That, as a United States citizen, you have the right to represent yourself in court. That's just the way it is. That's in the Constitution. At any rate, we got that law passed, and it made a huge difference in how many kids were being put into the foster care system. In South Carolina, I believe the following year, there was something like, oh gosh, only the ones that I personally know about, 8 or 9 different cases just in my surrounding area where grandparents used that new law and actually got temporary custody of their grandchildren while an investigation was going on. Some of them, if the investigation shows that there is something really wrong in the household where the children really don't need to go back there, given the proper provisions and agreements made by the grandparents, they can get permanent custody. And if the parents end up being, having their rights terminated because they're already a party to the case and have temporary or permanent custody, they can, adopt. So the grandparents could adopt their grandchildren way easier going that route. If it's a case of where DSS was involved. That was huge. After that law was passed and signed, the membership of the Grandparents' Rights Association jumped from 5 states to something like 25 states in 4 months. The word got out, and everybody wanted in on it. At that time, we had to change this thing around a little bit. We couldn't be just Grandparents' Rights Association of South Carolina or Tennessee or North Carolina or Texas or Kansas or whatever. We had to form a national organization. It's a real loose organization. Right now we're up to 42 member states. each one is a separate entity because each state has to work with their own set of laws. The federal government cannot enact specific laws about grandparent and children's rights in each state. All they can do is have the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services set guidelines. So this is why it has to be done in each state. By the U.S. Constitution, that is considered a state's right, and that's actually states' rights is a big part of why this country had a civil war. It was that war was fought over a whole lot of things besides just slavery, and I'm not going to get into that. But states' rights was a big deal, and that had a lot to do with it. The second law that we got passed in South Carolina was actually simply we found out about by accident because we'd made a lot of friends in the legislature. Come to find out that there's another statute that has nothing to do with when kids are taken by DSS. It's just regular family court. When parents split up and there's custody battles going on and that kind of thing, a lot of times grandparents get left out of the loop. One parent, and it doesn't matter which one, will end up getting primary custody. That's starting to change. It's going to 50-50, a whole lot more than it was before. But if one parent gets primary custody and that parent decides, I don't like my in-laws, so I'm not going to let the kids see them anymore, well, that may be their reason, but that doesn't make it a good reason. And the people that suffer the most in a deal like that are the grandchildren. So South Carolina had a provision where grandparents could petition the court for visitation privileges under those kind of conditions. The problem was there was conditions in the statute at the time that actually contradicted itself. One provision said that grandparents had to prove a parent-like relationship with the child before all the trouble started. So if the grandparent was doing a lot of babysitting, maybe the parents had the children over to grandma and grandpa's house all the time, and they developed an almost parent-like relationship, that would qualify for that. Well, there's another part of that same statute that also said that if visitation were to be granted, then the grandparent had to prove that granting that visitation would not interfere with the parent-child relationship. Now think about that for a minute. You can't interfere with the parent-child relationship, and you have to be able to prove it. But at the same time, you have to have had a parent-like relationship with the child prior to the trouble starting. How do you do both? I see no way you can do both. So it was almost an impossibility to live up to the statute to gain visitation privileges. So what the law that we found out about in 2014 did was it removed or this was a bill at the time. It would remove the provision saying that the grandparent had to prove the parent-like relationship, which is kind of the hardest one to prove. But it left intact the priority of the parent-child relationship. So it satisfied Troxel versus Granville that everybody is so worried about. South Carolina has one of the few grandparent visitation laws in the nation that has passed Troxel-Granville test. We have had people that have used the South Carolina law and gained visitation, and it's been tested in court. The grandparents have won, and so far not one single person has hollered Troxel versus Granville against this law. So it must be a pretty good law, and hopefully we can get other states to use it as an example to go by to improve their laws, since everybody's so scared to death of that Supreme Court decision, that might end up being a good thing to do. We found out about that law by accident. The member of the House of Representatives that had introduced it, now remember 2014 is the second year of the 2-year session, because our first year starts odd years and ends on even years. He had introduced it the previous year. We didn't know about it. Our sessions go, each year from January to June. We didn't even know this bill was in the works until, the middle of March. Well, we did a combination. We did first I contacted Representative Lucas, who was the guy that was the original sponsor. I asked him, I said, look, I know you want this thing to pass. And he pretty much said, yeah, but I don't give it much chance. It's looking bad because it just seems to be dead in committee. Well, we started a letter writing, an email, and telephone campaign. That bill passed the House and then went to the Senate and passed the Senate and was made law before the end of the session in June. In South Carolina, that's almost unheard of. Now, I'm not going to brag about that, because what did that was literally thousands of people calling in, emailing in, sending letters in to every single member of the South Carolina House and Senate, telling them we need this bill passed. Now that's that's what this is all about. The Grandparents' Rights Association is in existence to change laws to make things better for the relationship between grandparents and grandchildren. If we can do it in South Carolina, considering the political climate here, it can be done in virtually any state. And I could not be more proud of the membership of this organization. We've got people all over this state right now. In the 42 states that we've got as memberships, we've got close to 5,000 members now. A year and a half ago, it was like 4,000, and it's up about 1,000 now. So we're approaching 5,000 nationwide in 42 states. And with that kind of vocal power behind you, you get an email campaign going, or telephone campaign. Yes, state legislatures will recognize that calls and emails are coming from out of state, but what that does, even though a lot of them will say, well, gosh, that doesn't mean anything to me, that's not my state, they also in the back of their mind are saying, wow, we're being watched from all over the country. Maybe we'd best look at this. And then they look at it, and then they see that it makes common sense, and then they do it. Of course, that's assuming it makes common sense. So we have to be careful about the legislation that we propose. And the secret to that is identify a problem. Write it down. What is the problem? And then come up with a possible solution. And write that down. Because here's what happens. When you go in to talk to a member of the legislature, say if I go in to talk to my senator, I'll go in and I'll say, Rex, we have this problem, and we need to get it fixed. And this is what the problem is. And then I sit there. Rex is going to look at me and he's going to say, well, okay, you have a problem. I understand that to you that is a problem. It may not be a problem to other people, but to you it's a problem. How do you propose we fix it? And if I've got nothing to say, I just, lost the argument. The conversation stops right there. If all I can do is say, well, gee, I was hoping you could help me with that, then that's pretty much about all I'm able to do. But if I offer a solution, if I say, Rex, here is the problem. Now, this is what I think the solution could be. It may not be a good solution, but it's a solution. First off, Rex is going to say, hey, this guy means it. He's come up with a solution for the problem. he's not going to let this go. And they listen to you. If I can do it, anybody can do it. Believe me, before 8 years ago, 9 years ago, I had absolutely no interest in talking to anybody in a legislature anywhere. You know, I was just like everybody else. I rocked on and just lived life and looked at the candidates I liked and decided who to vote for and voted for them, and that was all I ever did. I had no idea what was involved in making all this. We have to educate ourselves, and then we have to get into the system and participate. By participating and helping these folks understand, look, this is a problem and this is how we think it needs to be fixed. By doing that, we are helping shape our state and the country. And you know what? That is a responsibility of every American citizen. Back when this country first got started, they taught kids the Constitution in school. They had to memorize the Constitution practically. They for sure had to memorize the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. I think a lot of places they had to have that committed to the child's memory to be able to get out of middle school, or what we call middle school now. I don't know whatever happened to that, but that needs to come back. At any rate, that's kind of a sidetrack. But that's kind of how we got started, how we've evolved, and I'm not sure about where we're going. But one thing I've learned personally is protests just don't do much good. To reiterate, you stand out there and you make noise and hold a sign up, and some people are going to agree with you, some people are going to disagree with you, but it doesn't get any laws passed. The only thing that gets a law passed is to go into that dude's office and sit down across the desk from him and say, hey, look, this is a problem I've identified, and this is a solution I think we've got here that we could use. Then if he likes your solution and agrees that it is a problem, he's going to introduce a bill. And if the other people in the legislature like that bill, then it's going to pass. And if the governor likes it, the governor's going to sign it, and it's going to be a law. That's the way it works. I think Mr. Workman kind of went into the details of all that, so I'm going to skip all that, all the gory details of how you get through all that stuff. But that's pretty much how it works. Now, as far as things that we've been able to accomplish, I can speak directly to some stuff here in South Carolina, and we've got success stories from all over the nation. But just because of the activities of this organization right now, there's one family here in South Carolina that had 5 kids that were taken by DSS. There was actually 3 sets of grandparents because there were 2 dads involved and the mom. And DSS was not going to allow, they wouldn't even talk to the grandparents about anything having to do with custody. But because we had gotten these laws passed, 4 of those 5 children are now in permanent custody with their grandparents. And guess what? They started off in South Carolina, but 2 of them are with a set of grandparents in Georgia, and another 2 of them are with a set of grandparents in Virginia, not even in the same state. So this is way more than just a single state issue. The 5th child, a lot of it because of the efforts of a lot of our people, and because the mom finally got her head on straight and decided to do the right thing, the youngest of the 5 kids is now back with that mom, and they're doing great. She's able to handle the one child where she couldn't handle 5. The whole family communicates with each other. There's nothing in the placements that said that the parents could not have any contact, so everybody visits, but the 2 sets of grandparents in other states have permanent custody, and will have until those children grow up and become adults. Couldn't ask for a better placement than that, and everybody is happy with it, even the mom. I don't know about the dads. I haven't been in contact with them, but I understand. One of them in particular isn't really all the greatest of people anyway, so that part doesn't really surprise me a lot. However, just here in my county, that was in another part of South Carolina. Just here in my county, I know of 3 families right now that the grandchildren are living with grandparents simply because of laws that were passed in South Carolina. And one of the best that I can come up with to tell you at all is we have a lady here in South Carolina who happens to be the director of our South Carolina chapter. I had to, get a state director for South Carolina so that I could watch over 42 states. It was, trying to handle all of it is just too much for one person, and actually I'm almost really pretty much overwhelmed with the 42 states. But our state director here used the statute that that was passed in 2014, and she ended up having to sue her daughter to get visitation with her granddaughter. The court allowed it. She won. She did it pro se. She did it without the help of a lawyer. She studied the statutes. She got some assistance from one of those outfits that helps you with the paperwork part of it. Other than that, and she did all her own representation in court, and she now gets court-ordered visitation with her granddaughter. So it can be done. We're proof that it can be done. And this is why we do this. It's to show that it can be done. Some of the things I've personally been involved with, other than just that, and I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but this is because this is stuff that a lot of times somebody has got to do. Sometimes we're just thrust into a situation that we didn't want, wasn't counting on, but you end up being there, so you just pull up your bootstraps and you just plain do it. That family of 5, I had no idea that I was going to get thrust into that situation, but I was. We got a lot of people involved. As a matter of fact, we even got a state senator involved, and not my state senator. This is from a whole nother county. Partially for some of the stuff that this organization and other organizations have uncovered, our state legislature, specifically the Senate, has been doing an investigation of our DSS for the last 3 years, and it's still an ongoing investigation. So far, a state director has been forced to resign. Another one is looking not all that great. A lot of caseworkers have, for some mysterious reason, decided to pursue other occupations. I don't know if it was because they were about to get found out, or if they just didn't want to be scrutinized, or if they just got tired of it. We'll never know. But we actually have a bill that was introduced last year and will be reintroduced this year to completely abolish DSS in South Carolina and reestablish a whole new agency completely completely rebuilt under different guidelines, different management. That's the important part, is different management. You throw the same people in there doing the same thing with a new name, you haven't done anything. Completely restructured. A lot of the stuff that DSS here was doing, they will no longer do if this bill passes. It'll be a complete redo, and I hope that it'll be a model for, frankly, the rest of the nation. I really do, and I'm proud to say I'm involved with that. As far as upcoming legislation, that's one of them. One of the big ones here in South Carolina, one that we're looking at is the concept of implied immunity. Not all states have this. Texas has a law against this, against implied immunity, or at least severely restricts it. I want to get one passed here in South Carolina to do the same thing. Currently, DSS caseworkers who are not law enforcement, all they do is go out and investigate complaints, and if there is what they consider a justifiable reason, they call in law enforcement to investigate criminal complaints. But a DSS caseworker has the same immunity that the police have if they're conducting a police investigation, or firemen have if they're fighting a house fire. If they do something wrong in the course of their duties, say, as an example, if a police officer is on an undercover sting for narcotics, he may be forced to buy narcotics in order to make the bust. That's breaking the law. Well, he has implied immunity he cannot be prosecuted for doing that in the course of his duties. A fireman, a lot of times, will have to break into somebody's house to put the fire out. Well, strictly speaking, that's breaking and entering. He has implied immunity. He can't be prosecuted for that. A caseworker can actually break a law, can lie on a form to make a case, and I have actually seen this happen. I've watched a caseworker just out and out lie in court, commit perjury, and they are not prosecuted simply because they're a caseworker. The only reason. Well, I want a law passed in South Carolina that will eliminate or severely restrict implied immunity for those caseworkers. If I can't think of a single instance where somebody from DSS would have to break the law to do their job. I dare anybody to tell me of any one thing that a caseworker would need to do that's illegal in order to actually prove a real bona fide case of child abuse. I don't think it can be done. So why do they need implied immunity? I want to get that eliminated in South Carolina. But now the real big one. We have national legislation that is in progress right now that everybody throughout the United States can get involved with, helping get passed. If you've got pencils and paper, write this down. House Resolution, or H.R. 5456. It's in the United States Congress. It has already passed the House of Representatives. Right now, it's in the Senate. It's already had first and second reading. Right now, it's up for debate and vote on the floor for third reading. If it passes, here's what it'll do. If you look at the way things are right now, the federal incentive coming from D.C., the Department of Health and Human Services, leans greatly towards the foster and adopt system and does not provide a whole lot of funding for family preservation projects. Very little at all, really. And so what happens is DHHS in D.C., they write their guidelines in a way that makes the states comply to get their federal funding. Well, right now it's set up so that it's practically some places it's 70-30, some places it's 80-20. That being percentages, 70% goes more to the foster and adopt system, and 30% goes to family preservation, or 80-20, the same thing. Well, what 5456 will do is it would effectively over a time period reverse that. Department of Health and Human Services would have to rewrite their guidelines. See, all Congress can do is write a federal law telling DHHS up there how to write their guidelines. Then they write the guidelines, and the states have to comply with the guidelines. The federal Congress, or U.S. Congress, cannot write a law to tell South Carolina or Oklahoma the laws, actual laws that they have to follow on child abuse or neglect. That's up to the states. So what they do is they write these guidelines and they tell the states, you follow these guidelines or we're going to withhold your federal funding. 5456 tells DHHS, change your guidelines. We want family preservation when at all possible, and the foster and adopt system only when necessary, and only when absolutely necessary. That's basically what it would do. There's a whole lot of details. It's a big, huge, very complicated bill, but basically that's the main crux of the whole thing. This is legislation that would help the entire family court system, and for sure the foster to adopt system, and the family preservation and child welfare in general. That's our, my personal, and I hope everybody's big one to get passed. We're on a deadline. If it doesn't, right now the Senate, the U.S. Senate, is temporarily adjourned until early December, and if they don't pass this bill and get it to the president for signature before they adjourn for the year, which is right before January, it's going to die, and it'll have to be reintroduced the following year. And it'll have to start the process all over again. It'll have to go back to the House and pass the House, go through all those committees, just like Mr. Workman explained before, and then go back to the Senate and go through all those committees. It could take another 2 years to get something going. But we have a chance of getting it going now if everybody gets into it and really, really puts pressure on their senators especially to get this bill out of the Senate and back to the House, or not back to the House, but to the president. That's essentially about all I've got. That's a history of the Grandparents' Rights Association, what we've done, the philosophy of the organization, as far as what to do to get things accomplished. Get laws passed, work to get the legislation done. Protests don't really work. Talking to legislators does work. We've proved that. I've told you a little bit about what we've accomplished so far, and a lot of these same things have happened in other states. There's current legislation in process right now in several states. The last count I had was like 9 states, and there may be more now. I'm not real sure. I don't have a complete list because I've kind of been out of the loop for a little while. And I'm losing my voice. I'm going to have to quit and let you guys have this meeting. Oh goodness. Well, that's where we are. I hope I've kind of given you some good information. And I'm going to shut down this live thing, and I'm going to go into the Oklahoma Facebook group, and let's have some discussion in there, because with this setup that I've got here, it's hard for me to do both. So, and I'm not seeing any comments in this comment section over here, so I'm not sure what that's even for. So I'm going to shut this off and then head into the group, and I will see you guys there. And we will talk to you in a little while. And thank you very much. I really appreciate the attention, and I hope you didn't throw too many things at the screen.